In the long run, the price turned out to be high. Many Iranians believed that the Shah had returned with Western strings attached, that this was the beginning of what some called 25 years of American occupation. By 1978, almost 40,000 Americans had moved in, most of them military and civilian technical advisors and their families. The life was easy, the pay was good. They might almost have been living in an affluent American suburb. It was a Christian and Western oasis in an Islamic country.
Most of the Americans, almost all of them, they were living in the best apartments, the best places in the city. And they always had the ability to live highly comfortably. And the poor people, most of the people didn't like that. I saw like an American in a store, I would say, listen, you're taking my food, you're taking my right.
It is a distressing irony that as Iran grew wealthier, the poor grew hungrier. Half of Iran's population lives in rural areas, where farming is primitive and water is scarce. In spite of that, Iran was once self-sufficient in food. In the Shah's time, possibly because of the emphasis on industrial development, Iran became a food importer. Today, the situation is worse. Food imports have tripled this year to at least $9 billion. They swallow nearly half the country's income from oil. It was the oil income that triggered the revolution. It smashed traditional family and social arrangements by pulling people off the land and into the cities. In the cities, squalor combined with anger and inflation, a recipe for revolution. Again, Henry Kissinger.
What was not understood was the political changes that would be inevitably associated with such a dramatic transformation of a backward society which was moving into the modern era in a 10-year period with a process that had taken nearly a century in Western Europe. That is a criticism that is, and that one should reflect about, the lack of understanding of the impact of economic change on political changes. That is a lesson we ought to learn for the future.
Half of Iran's new wealth wound up in the hands of 10% of the people. Richest of all was the Shah himself. His beginnings were fairly modest. His father, who created the Pahlavi monarchy in 1921, was an army colonel. But he called himself King of Kings, and the Pahlavi dynasty was arrogant, repressive, and corrupt, weaknesses largely discounted by American intelligence. This report by a House subcommittee criticized the CIA and State Department for insensitivity to deep-rooted problems in Iran. The subcommittee said that intelligence and analysis were weak, and that unfavorable assessments of the Shah tended to be downplayed. The CIA's political analyst for Iran from 1968 to 73, Jesse Leaf, says that happened to his assessments.
The agency has a lot of people publishing for a very small audience, and my reporting would go to the President, Secretary of State, and policymakers. I remember distinctly writing in the early 70s about the Shah's megalomania, delusions of grandeur, his feelings he was a world power, and the danger that this presented to United States policy. And I was told in no uncertain terms such reporting was not going to be published. It was not U.S. policy to criticize the Shah as I was doing. This was against the normal, established policy toward Iran and the Shah.
The question is asked whether the CIA failed. And to some extent, the answer has to be yes. But in fairness, one has to point out that a revolution couldn't have gotten started if the person most concerned, namely the Shah, had not, if his intelligence services hadn't failed as well.
The Shah's intelligence was gathered by his secret police, SAVAK, which the CIA set up and the CIA and Israel helped to train. During the revolution, demonstrators destroyed SAVAK headquarters. SAVAK spied on and tormented those who opposed the Shah. One of its tools was torture.
These are descriptions of some of our brightest and most promising young men of this country who for the first time dared to stand against the dictatorship. Many of them died directly under torture. Some of them were made to commit suicide.
Hidayat Matin Daftari, the leader of the liberal opposition, is on Khomeini's wanted list. During the Shah's regime, he helped parents of young people who had vanished.
Information has not been found about some of them. Some of their graves are not known. And what is important to a family is to find a grave, to make sure that he's dead. This is just one small drop against an ocean of sufferance, an ocean of atrocities, an ocean of crimes committed by the old regime of Iran, which was highly supported, highly guided, and highly accepted by the United States.
The average Iranian linked the United States with the oppressive governing elite of Iran, and which is why there's so much hostility there now toward Americans.
NBC News correspondent Richard Hunt talked to some of the mourners.
How was he killed?
He killed by the
Officers,
murder, yes. The United States government give the Shah plane, bomb, Carter. He is the right hand of the Shah. He helped him, of course. Yeah, yes, murder. That's good. Another one.
In exile in France, from which he ran the revolution, the Ayatollah Khomeini exploited the feeling against the United States, which he has called a wounded snake. While Khomeini was in France, Ambassador to Iran William Sullivan recommended making contact with him. The decision was no.
The State Department agreed to send a man to be in touch with him. I had proposed that we be in touch with him. That proposal was vetoed, and so no direct contact has ever been had, as far as I know, between the United States government officially and the Ayatollah directly. We did talk to a number of his acolytes and a number of his assistants, but there has been no direct contact with the Ayatollah.
Now, whose veto was it?
It came in the name of the president.
If contact had been established with the Ayatollah, would that have annoyed the Shah?
No. The Shah had been aware that we were going to make the contact and had approved it.
Do you have any idea then why the move was vetoed?
No, I don't. Had we been able to make direct contact with the man who obviously felt some of the direst things about the United States, he might have been able to see where we had certain national interests in the preservation of the same sort of Iran that he would like to preserve. It was my first experience in a genuine revolution. This was a revolution that began with the use of street violence, demonstrations, arson, every pertinence of offensive Western civilization as the Islamic extremists saw it was put to the torch. The street violence involved many of the young leaders of those actions, I believe, had learned some of their experience when they were college students in the United States during the days of Vietnam protests, because they copied those examples. Very well organized groups. The young Iranians who had never had their hands on a rifle before just became fascinated with the experience of being able to shoot the rifle into the air.